The perception of a made in China is shifting. With valuable intellectual property portfolios and global distribution networks, some Chinese giants and some small and medium-sized companies have gained high brand power overseas. As momentum grows for global expansion, how do Chinese companies go about strengthening brand values? What are the key elements in establishing brand China as innovative, cutting-edge, and pioneering? And how will IP protection and cultural tradition help Chinese brands as they go global? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by He Jing, an attorney at Anjie Law Firm, and Qu Hong, China CEO of Burson Cohen Wolf. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue. Increasingly, needless to say, the Chinese consumers and entrepreneurs alike are aware of the importance of brands, and the success of the China story largely depends on the degree and the forms that we assume in being part of the globalization dynamics. So tell me very quickly, how important is it at this stage of China's development to use brands, although we used to keep a low profile for different reasons, to use the brands and promote the success of China's story?
I think the building brands is probably the #1 thing now for the Chinese firms. I think China has been doing very well in terms of being the manufacturing center of the whole world. Now, when we move up the value chain, the building brand, building trust, actually, that's the key thing for the Chinese companies in China and beyond the border of China. I think that's the most critical thing for the Chinese industry at these days.
Yeah, the value chain. As well, high value-added products largely depends on the degree and forms of the branding, needless to say. What are your thoughts?
So, for example, in 2019, that most likely that GDP per capita will go beyond $10K US in China. This is an important watershed. So if we look at the smiling curve of the economic development, I think we are so strong in the past decade in terms of manufacturing, but that's in the bottom. And then the two upside of smiling curve, one is more R&D and IPR, the other end is the brand. So I think we don't have any other options. The Chinese economy, Chinese brand, on the way that we are moving forward, move up the value chain and make brand a more globally influential brand is the only way we have to go. And we have to learn.
It's actually also the requirement of the economy, the scale of the economy. And the Chinese, the manufacturing capacity is amazing, right? It's pretty much, in the domestic market is not even enough. So naturally, the Chinese firm need to export around the world. Now, to export, you have two choices. Either you are continue to be the OEM, right? Be the OEM factory for the global brand, I mean, the existing multinational brands. Another choice is you want to make sure the Chinese brands are as famous, as the current existing the multinational brands. You really want to go to the other markets, gain the trust, gain the reputation. So that's actually the way to go, and it's actually the requirement of the economy.
I'm not sure if a parallel comparison can be drawn between this punchline. A gentleman is rather than does. A brand is rather than does. However, increasingly, Chinese consumers demand better quality. It's not just the glow of the product. It's also more about the quality, desirable quality. What do you think of this area where we can do more to make sure, look, this is something real. It's not just the glow and appeal of the products themselves.
Yeah. So actually, when we're talking about brand, what is the difference between brand and product?
Yeah.
So first, you have to have we are so good at manufacturing higher and higher quality products with lower cost. However, brand is something else on top of that. It's the value, is the emotional touch, is the symbolic feeling that you represent. So now we all believe that in the next decade or even longer term is a new era for the Chinese company, building on the very solid quality of new product, cutting edge technology, but adding something more broadly and globally welcomed the value to our products. And that's the brand that Chinese companies should build in the next decade.
Yeah. Consumers are likely to identify with the brands whose symbols and connotations strike a chord with them. To increase the awareness among different generations, what would be your suggestion on the design of symbols and branding techniques? Well, this is very much a technical problem, right?
It is. It's really about the communicates, right? Right now, there's a big story about this Chinese sort of the new online idol, the Miss Li Ziqi. She's been doing all this video about how she cook those traditional Chinese food in those rural setting. Her team did this wonderful videos, and it has been very popular in China. But nowadays, she got a big hit in the YouTube. She got a huge following, outside China. While inside China, I know like my wife has been following her for more than a year or so. So we've been starting purchasing all this merchandise she's been selling, her team has been selling. That's the reason is that people identify with her. People just love her, and people that love the brand that she's representing. What all this traditional value, all this taste, it's the whole perception thing. I think our Chinese people are really creative. We know how to design, we know how to communicate. Right now within China. But I think that our entrepreneurs, our Chinese firms are actually in the learning curve that how we can communicate to the whole world, right? We can communicate the kind of universal value, the good things that all the different culture can be identified with. I think that's probably a big job for the Chinese firms to develop.
Yeah, and also a very technical suggestion is to create a global well-known brand. Starting from the brand name, we should give a more globally memorable brand. For example, like Alibaba, like Oppo, these type of things, particularly those consumer-facing industries, that we really need a very memorable name, plus more representing visual identities, and also the right language. So this is all the technical preparation that we need to prepare.
And what about this issue? Controversies generate more value. For example, Mr. Ren Zhengfei thanks President Trump very much for promoting the brand of Huawei because of the controversial nature of 5G, the technological rivalry, vying for technological leadership in the new era. This is highly risky, by the way. It's politically motivated.
Right.
Not every brand of big company can run the risk of promoting their brand this way. But what do you think of the success of Huawei in our case study?
I think it's different layers, right? Getting attention, yes, is a very big part of the brand building. But essentially, I think, as Hong just said, that the brand is really about the meaning. What does it represent? I think Huawei has done a fantastic job at being communicated to the consumer around the world, especially the European market and the more market, that people identify, oh, Huawei is really representing high quality or the cutting edge technology being adopted in the cell phone. Right now, I think Huawei is increasingly identified with the 5G cell phones. Not just Huawei, right? Oppo, Vivo, and the Chinese brands, now Chinese cell phone brands are doing a lot more in the 5G. This is dramatically different from the 3G, 4G handsets era. Right now, the Chinese brands, when they've been using more the features, the cutting-edge features, whether it's a camera or the other, like a foldable phone, all this new thing, people starting to identify and say, wow, Huawei, that brand representing something new, something fancy. This is all the part about the digital gadgets, right? Digital gadgets is really about being cutting edge.
Oh, in other words, Huawei represents digital leadership that the Americans care so much if you want to maintain your global influence.
Yeah.
So what do you think of, say, the strength of a brand in this way, to be the first, to be the most important, to be the most valuable in the forefront, to shape the future in the world?
Yeah, Huawei, I think, is such a classic and interesting case in terms of Chinese brand going global. On the one hand, as we all said, that representing a very strong thought leadership in terms of technology, 5G, etc. But on the other hand, it's also a very classic challenge that usually a Chinese brand will be facing, a mixed feeling of skepticism, suspicion, to some extent fear, and even jealousy, because you have been developed so fast. So one example, this is a true example that recently I was talking with, for example, some chief bureau of foreign media here in China. They all talk about one example, that is Mr. Ren Zhengfei, in the past 12 months more proactively receive interviews not from domestic media but also international media. They all believe this is a good thing to do, because no matter what the true story is, we need to rely on a broader channel network to help us communicate. So they all appreciate, no matter what the story is right, they all appreciate the way that Ren Zhengfei take a more open and as a founder, more straightforward, address all the questions. So as we all talk about brand, in my view, is trust plus taste. So to build a trust, you have to be more confident in telling what the true story is. And this will be probably the best way to address people's concern, to let people have more confidence in your security, in your technology, and in your vision.
I think the fundamental thing is we got to trust the consumers around the world. I mean, there's some conspiracy theory that, hey, the whole world, I mean, the Western world or the Western media has all this bias, prejudice against China, Chinese brand, all the da. Some of the suspicion is probably valid, right, with the past evidence. But eventually, I think our Chinese firms got to be really confident. We got to trust the world consumers. If, as long as our products are good, and the quality are good, and we know how to communicate, keep having people known to us, and people get it. Chinese brands are as solid as the Japanese brands, or as the Korean brands, or the leading the American or European brands. I think that could happen.
Huawei is a new big brand, but what about, say, a less glossy brand like Li Ning, the sportswear? It went roller coaster. It had suffered setbacks,
right.
But it seems the brand is picking up after improving its management or whatever, finding a new niche in the market. What has happened, for example, for the management of Li Ning, a very famous sportswear brand, so that it makes a comeback and captures the attention of the consumers, Chinese and foreign alike, very quickly?
Yeah, I think the Li Ning's case at least give us 2 points. One is the first wave of Chinese brand going global is technology brands, for example, mobile phone, etc., based on the very mature and fast developing Chinese manufacturing and technology development. But the real and the larger second wave, I will foresee, is the consumer-facing brands, clothes, and even food and beverage.
About the lifestyle, the middle income families and middle class.
That's everybody cares. That's the universally common interest. And the second point, very interesting in Li Ning's case, is we always see the national is international. This does not mean that you simply copy something that we understand in Chinese culture to the Western audience. However, I think Li Ning find a right mixture between these two. Like they use China Li Ning, 中国 Li Ning, that are very popular in New York fashion. However, they translate these traditional cultural elements into a very universally fashion and cool and fun and young way. So that is widely welcomed by the global, particularly the younger generation, because that's something not just different, but also in a way that they understand.
And in a way, Li Ning was a big household name for, of course, most of the Chinese and for those who followed Chinese development in track and field and athletics in particular. You are watching Dialogue. We're discussing the issue of Chinese brands and why we have had this increasing awareness about the importance of brands as part of the global supply chain and value chain. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Let's look at how we should define Chineseness, because we're talking about Chinese brands. However, in the first 2 decades in particular, it's more about an embarrassing story for the Chinese brands to follow, to copy, to be viewed as a counterfeit. And that's a lot about the violation of IPR, so to speak. What do you think of an improvement in recent years?
You're talking about the IPR environment, right? The IP protection environment has really changed dramatically or substantially. I think one of the big drivers is the innate needs, the needs in China to protect the Chinese brand, to protect the Chinese innovation, to protect the Chinese content or the content that the Chinese company have been running. If you look in the different countries and regions, right, they go through some very similar stages. At the very beginning, they imitate, copying, And once they're building up, and the companies really care about the protection of their own IP. You know, China has been, for the last 20 years, I've been doing this IP law career for the 20 years. I've been really seeing how things really evolving. Sometimes even happen much faster than my own expectation. You know, China right now have the police force dealing with all the counterfeiting, and the Chinese customers been doing wonderful export control for years against the counterfeits. So the law has been keeping improving. The punitive damages now really introduced in the law. It's only just because our economy of scale is so massive, right? There's a problem always there. Sometimes when you have the massive economy, the problem it's not easy to like disappear overnight. But that actually created the great environment for the brand to grow here.
Here is a controversial voice about the alleged pressure being built up externally by, for example, the trade war between the United States and China, so that the Chinese companies, the Chinese authorities are forced by the external pressure to give a second thought to the importance of IPR. What do you think of this discourse, pressure coming from outside instead of just kind of urgency that comes from within?
I think, of course, the both way is working. I mean, the both directions, no matter external pressure or the internal urgency. But in my view, it's still the internal urgency and the need will be on top. So probably to some extent, the external pressure, the reason why we also to some degree agree that we do have a need to improve our IPR protection is because the Chinese economy moved to this phase. So this is, I think, closely tied up with the brand building, because again, the trust is the foundation of a brand. And together with the high quality and your own IPR, etc., any single legal case, for example, about copycat or counterfeiting, will easily destroy a brand or an image that you built. So as Buffett said, you spent 20 years in building a good reputation, you can destroy it in 5 minutes. So it's more and more about we need to shift our mindset. Many Chinese companies need to, as we're moving up the value chain. And by the way, there are so many IPs that we do need to protect now in our own technology companies.
There was there were some disputes, legal disputes between Hyundai of South Korea and Honda of Japan. Now, that said, let's look at the malfunction of basically the end of a life of the appellate body for the WTO because of the disputes between the United States and China. Now, once such disputes flare up again between these two biggest economies, what should be done to settle the disputes? I mean, South Koreans and Japanese are currently mired in kind of rivalry. But what about the U.S. and China? I mean, both sides would suffer casualties to a lesser degree. But what do you think?
I think if the disputes happen again, let's say there's another like a WTO case, right, about the Chinese IPR. I think nowadays the government in China will have a very different view. Most important thing is that the Chinese brands need to be protected. When our Chinese brand are going global, very big thing is really about anti-counterfeiting action, effective anti-counterfeiting campaign around the world. If you look at the supply side, okay, dealing with actually effectively even wiping out the counterfeits of the multinational brands will really benefit Chinese brands, will really benefit. Otherwise, Chinese brands have to compete very hard with the counterfeits. That's true in China and also outside China. So it's actually Chinese government interest to really want to wipe out the counterfeits in China, and also want to make sure the other countries of the WTO, the members, they want to do effective anti-counterfeiting work in their own country, and that will create more demand of Chinese brands. I think that game or that kind of phenomenon needs to be recognized by the Chinese government. I think it's become more natural for China to deal with the counterfeits.
Well, let's come back to examine the legal implications. We are looking at the end of appellate body within WTO framework. Europeans seem to have been caught in the crossfire between the United States and China. They complain bitterly, look, we fall victim to your legal battles. So Is it possible for the three sides, Europeans, Americans, and China, to achieve a consensus, to build a consensus as to how to settle the disputes concerning violation of intellectual property?
I personally believe there's such a possibility. Right now, of course, the environment is very difficult, right? And with all the disputes between all the three parts. But I'm hoping that actually with the phase 1 agreement has been made, and that the three parts will recognize there's a huge advantage and benefits for all the three parties reach agreements.
It's a win-win, of course. But Ji Hong, can you tell us a story? What about the setbacks? What about the success? And what kind of experiences you would love to share with your counterparts, Chinese and foreign alike, about the importance of protecting brands and intellectual properties?
For example, some big mobile brands are our clients. Actually, I think the dispute settlement between China and the EU is probably more likely, because many of now the Chinese brand or company, they focus on the European markets as a top priority, because anyway, because the dispute, the bilateral issue between China and the US. So American market is the next step. The top priority is in Europe. And so many of this, using mobile phone as an example, that we already have like more than half or more than 2/3 of the IPR registration in terms of 5G, in terms of relevance, applications, etc. Therefore, they also have to make sure that in some, not only in the European countries as their target market, but also their supply chain, and now also rely on, for example, South Asian countries, etc. They need to protect all their own interest against the potential counterfeiting in other parts, because China now is moving up the value chain, and we are shifting part of our manufacturing capability to other countries. This is not escape. This is actually a broader supply chain. And therefore, more and more in terms of 5G, in terms of AI, etc., Chinese company, they do have, as we said many times, is more than 50 of the overall global IPR registration. So the whole system, the whole ecosystem actually require a very different way of doing.
Yet another issue, I'm afraid, He-Jin and Ji Hong, is some of the best-known brands are actually made in some parts of China, like in Guangdong, Fujian. Under the brand or the glow of the world-known brand, Chinese workers working along assembly lines deliver the product. So what do you think of the quality control? Do you think we have been able to adopt universal standards of the European multinationals? What's happening, for the quality control? We share the brand of the European multinationals, their products, but the product is actually made in China.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what we should be proud of, our Chinese manufacturing capacity.
You don't think quality has been compromised as a result?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yes, no.
And probably to some extent, the best quality control, the whole chain quality control is mostly guaranteed in China. That's why, even though our, for example, requirement of environmental protection and labor cost is increasing, however, China is still the most key hub of the global supply chain. So this is representing another issue that is not our quality control issue, but we still lack of brand. So the premium part of having a global brand is what we need to do, or what we need to work on.
About 10 years ago, I interviewed someone in Shenzhen. They make all this Shanzhai phone, okay,
yes.
banded phone. And I said, why don't you do your own brand, okay? And he said, Mr. He-Jin, it's very easy. I don't want to spend money on advertisement. I don't want other people to copy me, okay? But that's more than 10 years ago. But you're looking at today's Chinese market, or even global market, it's dramatically different.
Yeah.
Chinese brands are getting more confident. They are more mature. They know how to build a brand. They know how to spend money. They do lots of commercials. Actually, some are very creative commercials. That's only, of course, that's only one part of the brand building. But the Chinese companies are willing to take the risk. That is courage. Many people forget about it. Building a brand is very courageous. You have to bear all the consequences, all the risks, by investing a lot of money in advertisement, all the brand building work.
For a long time.
And there's no guarantee your brand will become popular, especially in another market.
Many obstacles remain for Chinese brands. gentlemen. The overall awareness of Chinese brands is still low compared with Western brands, especially in the mature and developed countries. So trust and reliability in Chinese brands needs to be improved. What are the opportunities and challenges Chinese brands will encounter as they continue to grow and go global?
I think the trust issue is probably the biggest of the trust.
The issue of credibility.
Yeah. And in many cases that when we have a dialogue with foreign audiences, media, government, the most frequently words that came up when we asking about suggestions is trust and transparency. So because there are huge gap between China and other markets, I mean much bigger gap compared with any two markets in the world. And so as we mentioned, it's a mixed feeling. So transparency is the first step. Many times we found it's quite interesting. It's not because we do have something need to hide. It's more like a cultural habit. Sometimes many of our founders, CEOs, they tend to keep low profile. They don't feel comfortable to really feel very open and talk everything through. However, it's not the fact that they do have something to hide. It's kind of a cultural issue. So these all need to be gradually interpreted and changed, particularly if you wish to build a global brand. And you have to have the capability, feel more comfortable to deliver your message in different ways.
It's actually really about the international relationship.
It's also about Chinese traditional culture.
Yes.
Right. No.
The sense of humility,
yeah.
the poor ability to tell China's story. That's why I've been working for 20 years to tell the China story, to promote the brand of China. Well, people around the world may have a strong mixed feeling about whether we are paying off. But thank you for being with us. We'll continue to make more efforts to convince the rest of the world that we are trustworthy. See you next time. Goodbye.